Good evening, everybody. My name is Mason Rayburn, and this is the Rayburn Report. I want to apologize for last week. I couldn't do an episode. I was currently in Indianapolis, where it was -1 degree, in case you thought that it was a fun vacation. Today's episode, I want to talk about protesting, and I want to talk about two very specific examples of recent protests that have went on. Just put aside everything you think or everything you feel about the Dakota Access Pipeline, because we're not talking about whether it was right or wrong. We're not talking about natives or the environmental impact, or if it was some kind of favoring one side or the other, or business permits or eminent domain. Put all that aside for a second. Now let's just look directly at the protests that went on and what happened. The protests, I believe, for the most part, were nonviolent. And when you saw the dogs and when you saw water cannons being used on people in freezing temperatures, and this was, in fairness, this was not all the local police department. There was a private security force, which is essentially a nice word that we use for mercenaries nowadays, who were responsible for this. And what you saw was people across the board, despite how you feel about the pipeline, once again, put that aside, who look at that and say, hey, that ain't right. And on December 4th, I believe, the Army Corps of Engineering denied the easement and, quote, undertaking an environmental impact statement to look at possible alternative routes, end quote. And you got to look at that, at least from the protest side, as a victory. And it always warms my heart when you see protesters win. Because even if you don't agree with the cause, one day there might be protests for something you do agree with. And it is very nice to know that the powers that be, because I remember at least in high school, and probably before that, in the 1990s, and in the early 2000s, I think, there was a lot of technology coming out that was going to make what if you disagree with the protest, you call them riots, but to make riots almost obsolete. And I remember there was there were these beanbag looking smoke grenade launchers, and there was this sonic cannon type device where you could point it at a crowd and it would make noise and sound a weapon, and it would cause the crowd to disperse. And you've got to always look at technology like that, because it is those images that make us react, right? It is the dogs and the water being sprayed that cause the reaction. And so if you can't see that, if the noise thing is just a weapon, it doesn't have the same impact. If you go back to, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. being arrested in the diner, he was sitting at a table and he was arrested for it. It's those images that cause us to act and cause us to really take gravity. But what I noticed with this protest, from what I looked in the past, you would require hundreds of thousands or 10,000s of people to go out there and protest to get something accomplished. And even then, you always worried that you wouldn't have the people. And I'm sure there's plenty of causes now where the primary concern is, hey, people just don't want to come out. We're all too happy to spend time on Facebook and Twitter saying, we disagree with this, but very few of us, extremely small amount of us, actually go out and participate in protests and things like that. And what we saw in this is at least with social media, it is a amplifying effect. I mean, there was only, maybe 1,000 people there? And because of social media and, of course, traditional media coverage, but the word of mouth and the being spread, it magnified this way over proportions than what normally would have been prescribed to just a couple of people or 1,000 people. And you do want to thank the protesters, even if you don't agree with them. That's not easy stuff. Being out there in that weather and what you give up to go out there and do it. It is very nice to see passion in any kind of aspect, once again, even if you disagree with it. Because one day, there might be people out there protesting, fighting the fight, and with things you do agree with. But I want to switch gears And I want to talk about another protest that's happening that's not getting the same amount of attention, and it's because there's no dogs and there's no hoses being fired on people. North Carolina, in this recent election, presidentially went to Republican President-elect Donald Trump. In terms of the governor, it went to the Democratic candidate. The attorney, I believe the Attorney General of North Carolina, not McCrory. McCrory is the old governor. That's right, Attorney General Roy Cooper, who, what's happening, in case you haven't seen it, is that the former or current governor, McCrory, has agreed and signed into act a relinquishment of power from the government, from the governor's point of view. And by doing this, he's essentially, what it looks like is partisan, because it looks like he's weakening the Democratic governor before he can even get in the office. They're changing school board election laws. They're changing state Supreme Court elections. For example, in the future, elections for state Supreme Courts will be partisan. So the next time North Carolinians vote for one of the top judges, they'll either know whether he's Republican or Democrats, which before it was just their names. You'd have to actually, surprise, surprise, look into who you were voting for. Right now, one of the educational appointments, McCrory could appoint up to a total of 66 trustees on the board of the 17 University of North Carolina system schools. The trustees were responsible for making decisions regarding a university's mission, the strategy, and finances. They were a key part of McCrory's influence over thousands of teachers, researchers, and students. These new laws, Cooper can't do any of that, leaving him with 0 trustees. He can't appoint anybody. And it is very easy to say that the defense of this, if you go look, especially at the Republican National, or the RNC chairman for North Carolina, defended it by saying, we all do this. This is just politics is normal. Because, and if you look into the history of it, in his defense, reluctantly, the Democrats did something very similar in the 1980s, albeit with the lieutenant governor, not the governor, but still, they did something very hackneyed partisan. But call me crazy, folks, it wasn't right then either. There seems to be this thing where, 2 wrongs make a right, because they did it, because they were absolutely partisan and, they didn't care about democracy and any of this. We should do the same thing. That's not how it works, folks. Imagine if President Obama came out and said, president shouldn't be able to order drone strikes. Or a president, these little creeping powers that Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama gained over the course of their presidency. These little powers that creep up on you as technology outpaces legislation. What if he all of a sudden decided, nope, and it's because the president shouldn't have this power, and I just came to this realization at the end of my term. That's not how it works. The peaceful transition of power over to opponents is democracy. Technically it's republicanism, but it is the foundation of government. Because if we're trying to one over on each other, it's going to get dark quick, folks. Do governors in North Carolina have too much power? I don't know. Don't live in the state. Does the President of the United States have too much power? Absolutely. Would I like to see that curtailed and brought back? 100%. But I don't want it to be because of someone having a different letter next to their name. That's ridiculous, folks. But getting back onto the actual story, the protest, people were arrested in North Carolina for sitting on the second floor of the state legislature house and refusing to leave. They believe that this is unconstitutional, that this is a power grab, that this is politics at its worst, and God bless them. They went out, they protested. You can't protest on the second floor of state legislatures. And so what happened is the police officers and the protesters, very nice, very peaceful, very calm. I mean, you can go online. There's one video of one of the police officers, squatting down, saying, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to remove you." And she invites him to Christmas dinner. Like, you can't make that up. She invites him to Christmas dinner, and he's like, "Well, I'm gonna ask you to leave. If you don't, I'm gonna have to arrest you. Do you understand that?" And she's like, "Yes, absolutely." And they arrest her. But because this is a peaceful protest, because the powers that be, the authorities in this, aren't, you know, violent or doing the things that generate the knee-jerk responses of, hey, because the powers that be aren't, being shown in this horribly negative light against normal people, it doesn't make the news as much. So, you can agree or disagree with either side. Once again, I can see the pros of wanting to limit executive power. I can also see the pros of doing it to spite the rival team type of deal. And it's just time to hold people accountable. And once again, the Republicans in North Carolina, the governor and the legislature, are not representative of all the Republicans across the country. And just like the protesters for the Dakota Access Pipeline are not representative of all environmental activists or native defenders, or I actually think some veterans went out and protested too. And once the veterans showed up, it's game over. You turn dogs and water cannons on veterans, and you let me know how fast your little pipeline gets canceled. But that's just really what I wanted to talk about this week. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare because we're all handling Christmas stuff. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about protesting is fundamental to our ways of government. It is something that we had to fight for. It is not something that has always been. It is extremely new in terms of human history. The ability to protest your authority, the authorities that quote rule you, unquote. And whether or not you agree with them, or whether or not you even think it's legitimate, the fact that we live in a country where you can do that is something to be thankful for. In closing statements, just remember, God, I gotta edit this part too. I want to thank all of you for listening in. I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, every holiday that be's, Wintermas, Festivus, the winter solstice, happy holidays for those of you who don't get offended by 2 words. And I will see you hopefully next week. Thank you.